Hello, everyone. My name's Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. In a decade saturated with on-screen serial killers, David Fincher's 1995 thriller Seven redefined the genre and left an indelible mark on modern cinema. Its bleak atmosphere, high-tone philosophy, and haunting narrative dare to confront viewers with uncomfortable truths about morality, justice, and the human condition. The story of two detectives, played by Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, tracking a killer whose crimes are inspired by the seven deadly sins. Seven is a film as meticulous as it is disturbing, as much a meditation on societal decay as it is a procedural. Andrew Kevin Walker's uncompromising script is elevated by Fincher's brilliant direction alongside a host of other creatives at the top of their game. 30 years later, Seven remains as relevant, provocative, and confrontational as ever. A masterclass in tension and tone, and a chilling reflection of man's darker instincts.
Do you like what you do for a living? These things you see?
You have to wear blinders sometimes. Most times.
Detective William Somerset is looking for a way out.
You're retiring. 6 more days and you're all the way gone.
So how long have you lived here?
Too long.
Detective David Mills is looking for a way in.
We'll be spending every waking hour together from now until the time I leave. I'll show you who your friends and enemies are.
Look, I've worked homicide 5 years. Not here.
Now,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a homicide.
they're caught in a game.
No fingerprints and no witnesses of any kind.
Nope. About the only thing we know about that guy right now is he's totally insane.
Where the price of sin is death.
There are 7 deadly sins. Gluttony,
You're going to come take a look at this?
greed,
No one touches anything.
sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy. 7. You can expect 5 more of these.
Body was found on Tuesday morning.
I hate this city.
We're gonna get who did this.
This will be the very definition of swift justice.
There are 2 more bodies, 2 more victims.
This guy's methodical, exacting, and worst of all, patient.
He's laughing at us.
He had a gun.
He's 2 murders away from completing his masterpiece.
Let's finish it.
Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No.
Seven.
It's the question on everybody's mind, what is in fact in the box? We're going to be chatting about Seven, celebrating its 30th anniversary, and we have an incredible panel to chat about with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Katie McLean Hainsworth.
Hi, great to be here.
Chris Hainsworth.
Hello. I know it's in the box.
Novotny Lawrence.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Dodd Alley.
Glad to be here at 7 Central Time.
And rounding out the crew, Dino Clark.
Hello, sinners.
And we're going to be chatting about Seven from 1995, celebrating its 30th anniversary, or as I like to call it, Se7en. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. Just to be clear, we will be talking spoilers for this 30-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, go watch it right now. Come back. So, yes, as we do with all of our shows, we're going to talk about our origin stories as to how we came this movie for the first time. Dino, would you mind kicking us off?
Absolutely. I know that I definitely saw it in theaters back in 95 when it was first released. I want to say opening weekend or at least that first week. So I think I was one of the fortunate folks who didn't know what was coming and was shocked by that ending. So that was my first experience with Seven.
Nice. Dodd.
Yeah, I mean, not only is this one of my favorite scary movies of all time, this is one of my favorite films of all time, which is why I'm so excited to be here talking about this one. This was I saw this for the first time in the theater when I was about 14, I believe, and my mom and dad were agreeing to take me to our films at the time, and I never knew a film could end that way, and it really impacted me for the rest of my life. So I've loved it ever since.
Nice. Novotny, this is your first time on the show. Thank you for joining us. Novotny is an associate professor at Indiana University. And how did you come to this film for the first time?
I got to tell you, 95, I was living in Kansas City, and I always loved the movies. And so I was always excited to see the next. And I went to the theater to see this when it came out. I also did not know what was in the box. And I was completely blown away. Loved Morgan Freeman. Kind of got this cool new kind of version of Brad Pitt, and then it all comes together with that creepy performance by Kevin Spacey. And so movie just blew me away, and it made me want to see all things David Fincher moving forward.
Chris.
Yeah, I saw it. I think I saw it at the Music Box here in Chicago back in 1995. I don't think I caught it when it first came out because I was extremely broke in 1995. So I kind of waited for it to come to the less expensive showing. Luckily, it hadn't been spoiled for me because the internet didn't really exist in the way it does now back then. So, but yeah, it was, I remember sitting in those, no, actually, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. Not the Music Box, the 3 penny. I
there
saw
you go.
The 3 penny.
Yep.
I'm like, that is the perfect experience to see Seven, because that is a theater. Like, I'm surprised there wasn't a scene in the 3 penny in Seven. That's the perfect place to see it. So.
Yeah, it's our own little slice of 42nd Street right there on Lincoln Avenue. Katie, how about you?
I guess I'm the only one that didn't see it in the theater, and not anything against it. I just missed it. I think I have some strange relationship with this movie and The Usual Suspects. So I saw one because of the other, because I was such a fan of Kevin Spacey's work. So I can't remember the order, but I know I watched it alone in my bedroom in an apartment off of Irving Park, and had to keep turning the sound up periodically throughout the movie, which I then was convinced they did that on purpose, that it kept getting quieter and it kept getting quieter. So I would keep getting closer and closer to the set, and then at the end would be completely blown away by everything that happened. So that was my first experience watching it. But it was around 96, 97, 95.
Yeah, I was on tour in 95 with a theater company, and we were in Florida. I want to say probably Miami. And so I was in an unfamiliar city, and I was going to see a movie, on my own, and it was late at night, and nobody knew where I was. And that movie, coming out of it, I was like, I need to get home, like right now, like back to the hotel immediately. I had also seen Usual Suspects maybe a couple of weeks or months prior. I know that it had come out around the same time, and Kevin Spacey wasn't really on my radar. I knew him from Glengarry Glen Ross, and a couple of other films following that. But, this one really kind of announced him, this and Usual Suspect, that kind of 1-2 punch. And I went, okay, this guy's pretty great as an actor. And then we find out that, he wasn't so great as a human.
Exactly.
But yes, this was an incredible kind of announcing of David Fincher. I had seen Alien 3, and as Katie and Chris and I discussed, he had a lot of interference on that film. He'd come out of a music video background, and there was so much studio interference that he almost never made another movie. But then he came across the script for this one and insisted on creative control. And wow, this, I feel like, is David Fincher announcing himself as a force to be reckoned with, and he would go on to have an incredible career. But it's amazing. I can't believe this is 30 years old. Like, I still feel like I just saw it yesterday. Oh, wait, I did see it yesterday.
So, but they sent him the wrong version of the script.
That's right.
They sent him the original version of the script, which is what we see. But by the time they sent it to him, they had decided to change the ending. And then, but they sent him the old one, and he was like, well, I'm not doing it if you change the ending.
Yeah. And the story, that Andrew Kevin Walker, our screenwriter, he wrote this kind of as a love letter, hate letter to New York City, because he was somebody who was in from the suburbs and living in New York, and just kind of got this sense of, as Gwyneth Paltrow's character says, I hate this city. Like there's just something oppressive about it, and you have to armor up in order to just get through the day. And I think that's who we are introduced to in the form of Detective Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman. And boy, does Morgan Freeman anchor this film. As somebody mentioned, Brad Pitt was young and sexy and brought a lot of energy, but it's Morgan Freeman who is just the anchor throughout. Namatni, I know you just released a book, the Oxford Handbook of Black Horror Films, but you've known your co-editor Robin Means Coleman for a while now. She wrote the book along with Mark Harris, The Black Guy Dies First, which talks about Black characters throughout their roles throughout the horror genre. I'm curious, like, where does Morgan Freeman's Detective Somerset, where does it land in terms of being a Black character, or does this make it a Black horror film?
I would say that this is more probably, and this is not in. So there's a way that Robin R. Means Coleman, the way she kind of breaks down these horror films and Black representations within, and one is kind of Blacks in horror films, and the other are Black horror films.
There you go.
And I think this one is more of a Blacks in horror films, but not in the way in which me and my brothers used to make fun of movies when we were growing up. It was like the Friday the 13th movie, and then the brothers there, and we're like, oh, we know he's not going to make it, right? It's not that kind of Blacks in horror film, which was kind of fairly standard unless Blacks were there as support. It's more like you said, Morgan Freeman is a presence. He's a force. He's a person to even aspire to. And I think there are a lot of ways in which that's Mills's flaw. He can't see that there are ways in which he needs to emulate Freeman's savvy as a detective, but instead he does the Cliff's Notes, right? He wants the quick and easy version. And I think that is the flaw. But Freeman, for me, again, Blacks in horror film, and he is absolutely fantastic in this. You just believe him. Like, I don't even know how else to put that. I mean, what would everybody else say? Like,
yeah,
I don't
curious.
know.
Yeah, people's thoughts on Morgan Freeman as Detective Somerset here.
The precision of turns of the head and gestures, and when he's looking toward the camera and when he's not, and probably a lot of that is Fincher too, but it's just so masterfully executed to do so much with so little, and such economy of movement and of emotion. And he always brings just enough to convey where we are in the story right now and what his concerns are, and all of that, but by doing so very little. That's really masterful to me.
There's a lot of older detective, younger detective kind of tropes. Like I think of the movie Colors with Robert Duvall and Sean Penn, about you see the influence that Robert Duvall has on Sean Penn, and then at the end of the movie, he's sort of quoting Sean Penn is quoting what Robert Duvall told him. Never at any point do I get the impression that Brad Pitt's character would ever evolve into Somerset.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That other cop at the beginning of the movie, he pointedly asks, did the kid see the murder? And the cop's like, what the hell are you talking about? You're so weird. Like, that's who Brad Pitt would be in 30 years. He would never be Somerset. So he is sort of this like individual rose growing out of this dung heap, and he's tired of the smell, but he is the only worthwhile thing keeping this dumb keep from being anything other than it is.
I think something I really picked up on, because it's a very nuanced performance, but something I really picked up on this viewing, it was almost like his paternal instinct at times with Mills. He clearly had seen a lot of things and experienced a lot of pain and seen these traumatizing things in this horrible city, and you have this Mills coming in and him going out, and you just kind of notice in his performance this need to protect him when he's talking to R. Lee Ermey's leader or sergeant character, saying, I don't think this should be his first case. So I was noticing that sort of paternal aspect of his character, trying to protect someone from going through the pain that he has gone through, which we have not seen yet, and we don't know how that compares to this main story.
One of the things that I appreciated about Morgan's performance is his sense of calmness that I felt like he brought to every scene that he was in. You never really saw him raise his voice, get excited, get upset until probably like the third act, obviously with Mills, Somerset, and John Doe in the field. But you could tell very early on from the movie in that opening scene where Somerset is laying in bed and getting ready to go to sleep. You hear the noise of the city in the background. I felt like that was such a great setup for his character, where you knew without really saying it that he was very wise. He had definitely seen some stuff in his years as a detective, but he wasn't necessarily hardened by it like you've seen, I feel like, in a lot of similar, maybe not similar characters, but like the older detective characters that you sometimes see in these types of movies. But I think, like what was already mentioned, he was definitely Morgan's portrayal as Somerset was such a great yin and yang, or yin to Brad Pitt's yang as Mills, as that young, eager detective from the suburbs or from the country that was just ready to like go in and prove that he already knew the job, when obviously we knew, I think you knew as a viewer going in, like, oh dude, you are way in, you're in above your skis here, buddy. So Morgan Freeman, I cannot imagine Seven without him.
Yeah, and I mean, there were other actors considered for the role. We'll talk more about kind of like the movie that could have been. But I think what the other thing, in addition to his kind of sage, calm wisdom, is that there's an incredible amount of empathy. As you were saying, he hasn't been hardened. He hasn't had it beaten out of him, but he feels like he's at risk of losing his humanity. And that's why he needs to get out. And that's one thing that he's like, when he's faced with Tracy and the revelation of her being pregnant, or just like listening to this young detective in Mills and recognizing him in himself and going, I remember when I was young and hungry and wanted to take on the world. And now I'm kind of like, I'm tired, but I'm not dead inside. And I want to get out before I am dead inside. But this was also coming at a really interesting time in Freeman's career, because, you know, he'd already kind of established himself as a really solid character actor. He'd been Oscar nominated for Driving Miss Daisy. He'd done Glory. So this was kind of a shift for him, I think, as well. And it really kind of set up this kind of a strength of character that he would continue to emulate for the next 30 years. Like his career just kind of seems to have built off of this, but it's such a dark and dangerous film. And I think that was a really wise and yet risky choice on his part. Similarly, if we're talking about Brad Pitt, you know, he was coming out of a different career trajectory as well. But yeah, what are people's thoughts on Detective Mills as created by Brad Pitt?
I think I noticed this time around, I was almost kind of laughing at just how arrogant this man is, especially in the scene where he walks onto the crime scene of Eli Gould, the attorney. Walks into the crime scene with no gloves, tells the guys to take a coffee break, and sits down at the desk, which is at a crime scene.
Right?
Yeah. I love him in this movie. I think it's a really brilliant performance. He's always so much better when he is on the back foot and not the leading man. I love moments like, ladies and gentlemen, we have he just says the dumbest things. It's so much for Morgan Freeman to play off of, but then he's also one of those big dogs locked in the room. You know, he's got all this energy and he wants to prove himself and he wants to take care of Tracy and he wants to solve the murder. Like he doesn't give up. And he doesn't recognize his own flaw of simply that his emotions are not his greatest strength. They are the thing that's going to tear him apart. You know, he can't see that, but he just keeps plowing forward. It's such a great contrast to the precision of both Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey. He's just this wild firecracker that's going off all the time and is totally justified as far as he is concerned in everything he does and says. I love it.
Novotny?
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. I'd watched this about 2 years ago after having not seen it for a while. And when I watched it then, I'm looking at it, I'm like, you know, Mills is a bit of an asshole, right? Like that was my thought.
Yeah.
Somehow it had eluded me. Like, I don't know what I was doing that I'd missed that, but that was kind of what I thought. And then this time around, I'm thinking, okay, well, we wouldn't have called him a bro in '95, but he's like the ultimate bro detective in a way. And the performance is really great because he brings that kind of bro energy, but with this earnestness as well, because as you were saying, Aaron, like he wants to take care of his family. He loves his dogs, right? He loves his wife, but he can't get out of his own way, because he is, hungry and energetic, and there are ways in which I think the contrast is the world is mine, and that's kind of how he approaches it. This is mine, and I can solve this. Whereas Freeman has learned, and he is still human, and he gets it. He kind of sees it all for what it is. Even if you catch this guy, you're not going to be satisfied because of the nature of what he's done in this world. So I think that it's a great performance. He has his little Brad Pittisms, like sometimes the way he moves his mouth, and in this one I particularly love the way he continues to rub his head. It's like his tick. It just brings something to that character that I just really appreciate, and I can't really see anyone else in that role either teaming up with Morgan Freeman.
I think him getting the cliff notes is sort of the keystone to his character. It's like, okay, you can figure out what happened, but you're missing the point. Like the point of the Chaucer tales or the Inferno is not to know what happened. It's to read the text and experience it and process it, which, it's a sharp contrast to Morgan Freeman going to the library where he's known by the night staff and they just let him come in and bang around whenever he needs to, and him really digging into that as opposed to, just here are the cliff notes. Okay, I got it. This idea that you can shorthand all of this stuff, which I think he's very good at playing. And there's that moment of, without jumping to the end right away, but yeah, there's no doubt in anybody's mind out in that field what he's going to do. He is that kind of predictable, half-cocked kind of guy who's just going to like barrel forward. He just he kicks in the door without a warrant. He pays a junkie to, provide probable cause. He does all of these things that, if this ever got to a court case, Richard Schiff would have thrown out, so it's that thing of there's no way this is going to end without one of these three people dead. And that's the energy he brings to this. It's like Morgan Freeman says, this is not going to have a happy ending. And one of the reasons it's not going to have a happy ending is because of the way he attacks these issues. And I think it's a good performance.
It was interesting because thinking back on 1995, when I first saw the movie, I was already familiar with Brad Pitt, and I guess you could say a fan after Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall, which I love, but obviously a much, much different movie than Seven. So it was very interesting to see Brad kind of switch gears from the long-haired movie heartthrob to Mills, and it was really cool to just see him stretch his acting chops a bit. And I think especially in that third act, and especially those final moments, with Morgan, Brad, and Kevin, when we first see Mills walking up the stairwell in that first crime scene at the beginning of the movie, you hear the one detective who's talking to Somerset saying this was a crime of passion. And it almost like a bookend, because ultimately Mills commits a crime of passion by murdering John Doe after realizing that John Doe has murdered his wife.
Watching this young actor who is really working hard, and I mean that in the best way, like he's doing a lot. Morgan Freeman's doing a lot with a little. Brad Pitt's doing a lot with a lot. Like he's twitchy. He's finding words. He's struggling things. And it's kind of great to watch him inhabit that character who also really wants to prove himself. You've got an actor who wants to prove himself playing a character who wants to prove himself. And Brad Pitt's career changed after this. Like he became somebody who you would grab for things like Fight Club. He became
12
somebody
Monkeys.
the 12 Monkeys, which was the same year. I mean, he and Kevin Spacey were up against each other for Best Supporting Actor
That's right.
from 95. So again, I think 12 Monkeys is a very busy performance as well. Like that's just kind of who he was at that time.
I think people underestimated him as a pretty face, and he really understands the assignment. He's in some movies that I don't like, but I have no fault with him in them. I think he knows what he's supposed to do. He does it. He's been different a lot over the years. And this and Fight Club are probably my two favorite performances of his. I think he and Fincher really connect and really understand each other and really know how to help each other make the best movie.
And I'm excited by the fact that David Fincher might be making a Cliff Booth movie, which is his character from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's like, I'm like, wow, that seems like a dream I would have, because I think it's like Brad Pitt's latest great performance and David Fincher getting back to David Fincher and a character that I really enjoy. So I'm like, oh yeah, please do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Well, and in talking about like the film itself, this is a serial killer film. There was no shortage of those after Silence of the Lambs in 1991. We had tons and tons of serial killer movies, including one where Brad Pitt plays a serial killer, California.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had Jennifer 8. We had Night Watch, Natural Born Killers, Copycat came around the same time. You have that connective tissue from Silence of the Lambs to Seven, in that Andrew Kevin Walker, our screenwriter, he was kind of inspired by Manhunter the first time we met Dr. Lecter, and Silence of the Lambs comes out. It's a big hit. And still it takes 4 years for this movie to make it to the screen because it is so dark, because it is pushing boundaries. And Novotny and I were talking about this off camera, whether or not this is actually a horror film or not, it is right on the line such that you go, yeah, I would buy this as a horror film, or it's certainly something that can be a stepping stone for people to lean into darker material.
I mean, I think it learned all the best things from Silence of the Lambs, which is make your villain a real human being. Maybe not somebody you can completely understand, but isn't just out there wanting to slash people, make them as much a character in your film as the cops finding them or the victims or whatever. I refer to this film as psychological violence. Like it's more thriller than horror to me. There's very little violence other than Mills shooting John Doe.
Right.
And all the violence happens off screen, and yet your mind fills in so much of the horror and the gore behind each one of these crimes, because we're given, again, get just enough information about all of them to be able to really understand and start to feel like, oh God, what if that happened to me? Like you know that you would instantly lose your mind.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't. I don't know if I would necessarily classify it as like a horror genre film per se, but definitely there are horror elements. And in terms of like the serial killer aspect, this was one of the first movies I remember where you really don't know who the killer is until the last act, which I found super interesting. So that by the time we realize it's Kevin Spacey, I'm like, at the time, I don't think I knew Kevin Spacey. I think he, like you, from Usual Suspects, so I recognized him, but I don't think he was necessarily a household name. So I was like, hey, that's that guy. That's Kaiser Soze. But the other aspect, the serial killer aspect that I think I appreciated, which maybe Seven wasn't necessarily the first film to use this tactic, but it's at least one of the first ones I remember, which was that there was like a method to the madness. It wasn't just randomly killing people, but that there was a story, that there was a theme. And you could see as the movie progressed, the puzzle pieces starting to fall in place, but you really couldn't see the full puzzle. You couldn't see the full picture. And by the time you did, or you realized what was going on, it was too late.
This made me think of something. It's kind of what Katie was saying earlier about this is more about the aftermath and leaving it up to the imagination. I distinctly remember before I saw this film in the theater, there was another teenager in town, and they must have been pulling my leg or something, but they told me that the gluttony victim bursts. Like that's how he dies. And I think that's part of the reason why I went to go see it, because I like the Monty Python movie. And I was so surprised when I saw it that you didn't actually see any of the murders occur. It's all about the aftermath and seeing the people that had something to do with it. And I think this might even be a good segue, even, and we can talk about it later if we need to as well. But Leland Orser's scene where he's the witness and participant with the knife object. It's just these horrific things where the aftermath and the people that witnessed it or touched it or experienced it are sort of filling in those gaps about just how terrifying and brutal this was.
Well, and I think that's a great point, is that Fincher forces you to imagine. He gives you those puzzle pieces and he leaves the one big puzzle shape open that you are inherently forced to fill in your own mind. You'd be like, well, I know what goes there, and now I have to think about that. You show me that Polaroid, I'm like, oh God, I know what happened there. And that's kind of the brilliance of the way Fincher lays this out, is that he's going to require you to be involved. Like that's part of the contract that you two are going to create between viewer and director.
It holds up so well. It's like it just works. And I think that, as far as the horror, or what genre, it's kind of what we were talking about when we were saying that, it demonstrates how kind of quirky genres are, because we have, I don't think there really are many films that don't somehow blend genres or blur genres. So we have genre hybridization. And I think that can work, or it's applicable to Seven. And I don't need it to be a thriller. I don't need it to be a horror film. But I will say that I was struck by how horrific the world is in Seven that is created. And for me, that it is so horrifying. Whether it's just the way the rain is raining brutally, right? And you have these dark crimes, and then even Tracy, her suffering, it's there. Like if you look at her, she is clearly unhappy, and Gwyneth Paltrow gives a very nuanced performance here too, and particularly in the scene between her and Somerset in the cafe. I mean, you just can see it's a heavy place, and so that's kind of how I read it. And again, it makes it more psychological horror in that regard, but it really is just this dark and oppressive place. And then what you have is you have a monster, and it toys around, in my opinion, with the perceptions of the ways in which people think are monsters. I tell people all the time, let's stop acting like there are not truly evil people living in this world. And I'm not talking about somebody sitting around a cauldron, dropping in foot of newt and eye of toad in a pot. I'm talking about some people who are wearing suits and ties, right? There are truly evil people in this world. And I think that is very much who John Doe is. He's evil. He is the boogeyman, right? But he's a boogeyman with purpose.
Yep.
And in that way, he's even more dangerous. And so all of that for me, kind of, that's why I could read it as a horror film. But again, if people don't see it that way, I also get that, because certainly it is thriller and crime and all those things too.
I love what you just said about, Doe being a monster and being evil, because he thinks he's here to fix things. He thinks he's here to wake people up, and that maybe that will shake off the apathy, that by doing this elaborate crime, that people will be forced to not ignore it. It's so big. He talks about you can't tap people. You have to hit them with a sledgehammer. This is a sledgehammer. The events that we see in this movie have resonated over the past 3 decades. We don't forget about this movie because it is so dark, so dangerous, and so kind of button pushing.
The reactions of the people in the movie, because it starts in this very sort of like when they're at the crime scene of woman shot her husband because he hit her too many times. And everybody's just sort of like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Blah, blah, blah. That's just life in the big city. And then I think of like John C. McGinley in that scene with Sloth, that this hardened SWAT guy who's all brass tacks and yeah, well, we're going to handle this guy. We're taking care of it. And the second Sloth wakes up and he's like, oh my God. He's like the requisite horror that the people experience in the movie feels appropriate, which is not something you always get in quote unquote horror films, you know, just this whole like, this is literally something I have never seen before in my life, and now I don't know what to do. I'm a hardened professional who's supposed to be the guy to deal with these things, and we're all out of our element. I mean, and John Doe has a point. They like use illegal wiretaps to find out who this guy is. Like they were never going to catch him. And when they do kind of like mess up his plans, I don't think he had singled out Gwyneth Paltrow for his final moment, but he certainly then had, it's like, oh, bonus, you know, it's that thing of
it's the ultimate yes and
yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. And you know what he does? He seems impressed. He's like, oh, nice job, guys. I still don't know how you did that, but if you want to play, let's play. You know, that sort of like he is looking for, they're giving him the engagement that he wants, and then he gives them the engagement they don't want.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's like yell at me in the hall when I'm posing as a photographer. See where it gets you, right? I said he's a monster, but don't just dismiss him as a monster, which is another part of Mills's problem. That's one of his flaws.
John Doe uses the same tactics that Mills does to try to hit John Doe's identity, as far as, you know, posing as a member of the press to end up getting Mills' number, you know, Mills' address, which is how he ends up killing Tracy. But the other thing I was going to mention, AC, going back to something you shared a little while ago, is that, yeah, in John Doe's mind, he's not the bad guy. He's doing what he thinks is a good thing. And I feel like for most good movie villains, I feel like, you know, time and time again, you hear interviews from the actors playing them where they talk about, as I'm playing that character, I have to pretend in my mind I'm the good guy. Like, I'm not the villain in this movie. I would imagine that he had that same mindset, you know, going into John Doe, which is just, again, that dichotomy is so interesting.
The character John Doe feels like he wants to make a statement and be remembered, and yet his name is John Doe.
Right.
You know, he's not like coming forward and being like, and I'm Cliff Harris from 224. You know, he is this an enigmatic personality who will be remembered, and almost like Novotny said, become the boogeyman because nobody knows who he is.
Right.
I think that's the point, right?
Yeah.
He says
exactly.
It's not about me. It's about the work. The work is what
my
needs
act,
to be
right? My act is what will be acknowledged.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, speaking of which, I mean, I think that's one of the things that really helps propel this movie is that we quickly, I mean, gluttony is such a striking first image, and we are so caught up with that. And then we find out that, oh, there's greed. Wait a minute, there's a pattern. Like Somerset tells us there's going to be 5 more of these, and we are inherently hooked. We're like, okay, it's like when a movie title is like, you know, 7 murders by midnight. You're like, okay,
we're at 4 murders now. Yeah.
And it gives us that ticking clock. It gives us that countdown element. And we're like, gosh, okay, what are the 7 deadly sins? I wonder what lust is going to be like. I wonder what, you know, this one's going to be like. And I think that really, again, it's one more really smart thing that Walker and Fincher do to draw you in as a viewer. It forces you to engage.
And they subvert it, because by the time they catch John Doe, there's 2 that haven't happened yet. When John Doe walks into that police station, you're like, but wait a minute, what about wrath and envy? What about wrath and envy? Like, you're just going to skip those, you know, but you don't think, oh, he's got a plan for that.
Right.
I mean, unless you're watching it for the
it quickly becomes apparent that there's a plan. Like the fact that he wants to lure them out there. Everybody knows this is a terrible idea, but what are you going to do?
What are you supposed to do? Sometimes the only way to set off, to find out what the trap is to set it off. Like, that's, what else are they going to do?
It really is a good example, though, taking them out to the desert. I was noting this while watching the film of the horror in daylight. Because, I mean, for once you get some sunshine in this movie, and it's a barren wasteland with power towers everywhere. And it kind of reminded me of just horrifying scenes in daylight, such as Midsommar, and when they started to head out into the desert.
There are other horror movies where it's like well, wait a minute, he did what? And you start thinking about the plan afterwards, and it's like, well, then he'd have to be able to apparate or, do these things. But this is, you think about the crimes like Sloth. He kept that guy in there for a year before this whole thing. And when you start thinking about not only his dedication to this crime, the fact that he kept somebody chained to a bed in an apartment building for a year and nobody said anything about it. He made gluttony eat himself to death in an apartment building. Nobody heard any screams. Nobody, or they didn't report. That's where the horror really creeps in. It's like, oh, it's like the Kitty Genovese. It's like, all of these things happened in this city and there were clues everywhere. And if anybody had done anything at any point in that time, the rest of these people could have lived and this could have been avoided, but they didn't. And that is what's really horrific about it.
Well, that's the apathy, right? That's the apathy of living in the city is you don't pay attention to what's happening next door. You don't look at the guy, the homeless guy on the corner, because it would just eat away at you. So you put your armor up, and that's how somebody can be rotting away in bed for a year.
I always think that every time I watch this movie, I think John Doe is the type of serial killer that David Fincher would be, because they're both so methodical and precise and plan things out so carefully. And it shows in David Fincher's filmmaking, and it's the exact kind of thing. I mean, the plan is amazing in this movie, horrific as it is. It's to be lauded for its scope, its depth, and its precision, and his ability to improvise. I love the moment on the phone when he says, "I'm sorry I had to hurt one of you," acknowledging that he doesn't know the difference who they are yet, but telling them that's not going to be true tomorrow. I'm going to find out who you are. It's so specific and precise. It's my kind of movie. I love it so much.
I love the way he gets Brad Pitt to get Mills' goat in the car ride. You're alive because I let you. Because I let you live.
Kind of going back to like horror in the daylight. I know AC, our last chat was about Stepford Wives, where, the movie starts in the city and then transitions to the suburbs. And here, the whole film is set in the city, which I always thought was New York until recently. And then I think I read it was actually filmed in LA or in California, and they use rain machines to replicate New York, even though I don't think they really ever specifically call out the location. But I think going back to what everybody was sharing a moment ago, that it's kind of crazy and scary that, you can be in this heavily populated area, but still be so isolated, and probably just as isolated if you were out in the wilderness in a cabin in the woods, even though you're surrounded by people, which that in itself is scary.
I said this to Katie the other day, that it's like funny that this is arguably not his best movie.
Right.
You can have the argument that I like Fight Club better than this, or I think Zodiac is a masterpiece. But if any one person directed any one of those movies, they'd be like, yeah, those are my laurels and I'm going to rest on them. The fact that you can have an argument about, and if you can go well, his worst movie is Alien 3, and that was mainly because of a lot of studio interference and the fact that they didn't have a script. Everything else, it's even for me, Mank and The Killer, I'm sure, made for Netflix, still had a good time. They aren't Fight Club or Seven, but they're still pretty entertaining, and he is just so precise. And it's funny because I think about the opening credits and him coming from a music director background, and you have the 9 Inch Nails softly playing and all these cuts and blah, blah, blah. But then you get into the movie and it is a very traditional, it's expertly done, but the score is Howard Shore. It's who also did Silence of the Lambs. And it's not that sort of quick cuts in your face. It is establishment of shots. I think John Doe down the hallway, when he's coming home with that bag, and they're oh, this is what's going to happen, and he just instantly drops it and starts firing. And then that chase sequence, I always know what's going on. I always know where everybody is. The action is direct and clear. That's not something that you get. It doesn't go for jump scares. It really builds tension and suspense.
I'm glad you mentioned Howard Shore, because I think, part of the magic of this movie is the atmosphere that is set. and that kind of like oppressive horn that is used in Silence of the Lamb, makes a return here, but there's such mood that is laid throughout the entire movie. When we are talking about the precision, there's a precision to John Doe's thing in that, like, again, he's been cooking this up for at least a year, but then it drops Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It all just unleashes, and he has the ability to improvise these two final murders. We will never know what his original plan was, but we can all agree this was pretty good. This is a pretty solid improv on the fly.
Yeah, real quickly, going back to the opening, I feel like it doesn't get more 90s than that gritty, shaky camera opening credits with Nine Inch Nails playing in the background. But I remember, I think, when I first saw it in theaters, of course, I'm a huge Nightmare on Elm Street nerd, if you can't tell from my background. But I think from the opening New Line Cinema logo and then going into the credits, the first thing I thought, it was like, oh, this is kind of like the opening of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where you're seeing Freddy build his glove in his boiler room, and you're really seeing John Doe meticulously shave off his fingerprints, creating his little manifestos and sewing the pages together, which I think that for me just set the tone of the movie. Like, okay, this is going to be like something I've not seen or experienced before. And then real quickly, just so I don't forget, going back to David Fincher's kind of, I know Horrible Library, such a horrible director. I think he's like, this is the only good film he's directed. Everything else is garbage. I'm just kidding, of course. But I do want to give a shout out to a Fincher film that I even sometimes forget, which is The Game.
Yeah.
And I think that came out, I don't know if that was his very next film after this one. But
97?
Yeah, 97. Yep, you got it. So,
saw that one in the theater.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's a fun time. It's a little ridiculous in ways, but it's fun.
Yeah, but it's fun. You got me. So Fincher did not direct the credits. Fincher hired the guy who directed the credits. I'm pretty sure. Not the credit title sequences are almost always
creating the
out,
opening
right, to other
sequence,
things. But he sure hired the very right person to do it.
Well, and those credits were so influential. I mean, we saw variations on that for the next 20 years. Like it was so striking. And then we've had backwards running credits before. But at the end of this movie, where you have the credits rolling up instead of down, and you're just destroyed because the world that you thought you knew has been like, there is no justice in this movie. You think that maybe somebody will save the day, and at the end, there's only the fight. That's all that you can do is continue to struggle forward. And I like Somerset's parting line of "I'll be around." I'm not wild about like his Hemingway quote, and I'm like, do you think that the world is? Do you?
It's a studio thing. Yeah, that was a studio add-on to Unleash. I think Fincher wanted to end it with the gunshot.
Yeah, right. Apparently, I mean, they tell a really funny story on the commentary track about the first test screening, where it was ending with the gunshot. They cut to black, and then you're going to sit there for a minute, and then there were going to be credits. And at this test screening, the gunshot goes off, they cut to black, and then they immediately like thrust open the doors and turn on the lights and start throwing cards in people's faces. And it's like, of course it's a disaster because you didn't allow anything to settle in. And have them
also, Aaron, I believe I've read something today where Fincher said the people they invited to this test screening were people who loved Legends of the Fall and Driving Miss Daisy.
Yep.
They were like, I'm not sure why they thought anyone.
That is your audience
would
right
also
here.
Like this movie.
And didn't he like threaten his life or something, or tell him like he deserved to die?
That's right.
Yeah, he said he was standing outside. He said if he was standing outside the theater and two women walked past him, and one of them said, "Whoever made that movie should be shot."
Said the person who probably loved Driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right.
I'm not going to go there.
So he should have said, so you sympathize with the ending.
Yeah, right.
I think it's funny. I think that like if we were talking earlier about the ending and just horror and the way that they make you kind of, we imagine when these things happen, like we don't see gluttony explode, right? And so I will tell you all, and I have done this now the last few times I've watched it, I remember that when I open the box, in my mind, I think because that's the mode I'm in, I always imagine a lock of blonde hair, like that it kind of comes out in the breeze. Like you just kind of see it. Doesn't happen.
I have the same thing. I have the same
here.
thing.
Lots of people remember seeing Gwyneth Paltrow's head.
Yep.
But it's
Yeah.
not there.
Never
There is a quick cut a la Fight Club of her face while John Doe and Brad Pitt are talking. But you never see what's in that box.
what's in the
anything
box.
close.
Yeah, because I remember that lock of hair too.
I do.
Yeah.
So at least I know I'm not the only one.
Nope.
No, you're not. Okay, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm so glad I have found you all tonight.
I think it's actually a box of puppies that his dogs had. And that is
That's what the studio wanted to do. They wanted to put a dog's head in the box.
It is literally Schrodinger's box. You don't know. I didn't see inside of it.
But Katie, real quickly, going back to you, that flash of Gwyneth Paltrow as Tracy, I thought that was so brilliant, and it still hits me today because, Brad Pitt's performance in that moment as Mills, you can tell he's right there on the edge of like, do I take this guy down now? And like he has that moment, but then the second he thinks of Tracy, you're like, nope, he's done.
Over.
He's done. So
I don't think I've seen this movie dozens of times. Literally, I love it so much, and I don't think I've ever watched the ending without crying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's ever failed to affect me very powerfully.
Powerful stuff. And I think that, as Chris was saying earlier, where he talks about Mills, he kicks in the door. Like that's the foreshadowing. We know he's gonna kill him.
Gonna kick the door in.
If you were paying attention, you know he's gonna kill him. But that even with that in mind, that Pitt seems to be in such conflict and pain that he's able to bring that about. I understand like why you would cry. I mean, that piece of acting right there, that's all I ever need to see Brad Pitt do again. Like it is great in Once Upon a Time Out, but he's so good in that moment.
It's an iconic moment because we have been making fun of it for 30 years.
Yeah.
And yet every time I watch it,
They never laugh.
It
never laugh when he
like,
actually says what's in the box.
You can never make, you can make all the jokes you want to, and then at the end, it's not like I'm going to watch and be like, oh yeah, what's in the box? I'm like, yo, this is still as horrific as it was 30 years ago, even though we've made jokes about it for 30 years.
The line that also bounces around our house after what's in the box is somebody call somebody.
Yeah.
Like there's just that sense of hopelessness of like, somebody come in here and fix this because it is broken and there's nothing to be done anymore. Going back to the idea of when he kicks in the door, this is something I noticed this time around is the number of locks that John Doe has on his door. I don't think he could have kicked in the door, but also it speaks to a character that is so frightened of the world outside. He doesn't want them to get in to interrupt what he's coming up with, but he also is just I think he's very if not afraid, he's disturbed by the world.
I don't think you can argue that. I don't think there's any way he's not afraid of the world, but I think he is protecting what's inside his house more so than he is trying to keep people out of it. He is trying to keep others out. I think he's just trying to make sure that
he's
nothing goes wrong with this plan.
Yeah.
And all his thoughts and things he's setting up to happen. Like it's all he knows. I suspect that he knows he's not surviving this.
Well, I think he also knows
fruition of this plan.
He's not doing good. That's why he's trying to also,
Yeah.
I think there is some shame around it that he recognizes this is not, this is not what the world needs, but it's the one thing, it's the only way I know how to cope with it.
That apartment, I just was observing it in that scene. It was like there wasn't the slightest sign that I saw of furnishings or cozy comfort that it was a residence. It almost seemed to me like it was a shrine or a museum that was just waiting to be found. I mean, even the telephone was tucked away in a corner, and they had to follow the cord to find the phone because it was right where he wanted it to be.
No,
It's
that's true.
basically the basement of Silence of the Lambs, just in an apartment building.
Again, we talk about this creation of place and atmosphere. The production design on this entire movie is just incredible. That's Arthur Max. Every single moment just feels so well thought out. It feels so completely thorough. From the interior of Mills's car, when he gets the knock and he gets the cliff notes, to Somerset's apartment, to Tracy's apartment, to the fact that the train goes by, like all of those things give it such a sense of place that we absolutely invest in it. It doesn't feel like a cartoon. It feels like this is real life, especially for those of us who've lived in cities. Like you're like, yep, I recognize this.
There's
this
no
life.
shortcuts taken on the design at all. Mills's office with the tiny little desk in the corner that he moves to, the guy scraping his name off the door, like every place has a fully realized vignette that happens in it. The phone on the desk that keeps ringing and Arlie Army picks it up and says, not even my desk. Like it's such a real environment, everything.
It seemed like it was always an eternal, infinite dark place, whether it was the afternoon where it was cloudy and rainy. And then what I noticed this time around was in the evening, they have dinner. So you imagine to yourself, okay, it's dinner time. Then afterwards they look at pictures and drink wine. And Gwyneth Paltrow has already gone to bed. And then they're like, well, let's go talk to Elliot's wife. and I kind of, in the back of my mind, I'm going, well, what time is it? I mean, like, there's absolutely, they just go right over there and talk to her. So it almost seemed like it was just like darkness was just eternal. And there was no sense of like boundaries on bedtime or even time in general.
Well, they do a terrific job of establishing like this is going to keep happening. Mills, our Somerset only has 5 days left. Like the urgency is baked in every level of the game that's being played here.
I really appreciated, I think that there's the basic, just the costume elements first. I think even though we have Morgan Freeman, who was a cop, and he's working for the police force, he kind of comes out of that tradition of like a Sam Spade or a Philip Marlowe. He's got the hat and his dress. And even as you're talking about his name on the door that's being scraped off, kind of reminds me of the 40s, 50s detective films and that detective. And then the contrast with Brad Pitt's kind of, I watched that movie and I always like, hey man, would you iron that shirt? Like I want him to iron his shirt so badly. So you give you some insight into who I am. But like, man, iron that shirt and I want his tie right, but it matches their personalities. And so this time around, I was really appreciative of the ways in which the costume articulates that. And then that, of course, Fincher, being masterful, meticulous, is able to kind of work in after Pitt is injured on the set to work in the cast. And it just all works. And part of that is testament to Pitt's performance and also direction, but also the way it went with costume. Somehow it all just kind of works. And so it was those details that stood out to me this time around.
Everything feels like an artistic choice, but it also feels real. The police precinct looks like an actual precinct. A lot of times in movies, if you're going to a police precinct, it's like, ooh, low lights and interesting artistic, it's like, no, this feels like a place where people work, but it also feels like a painting. It creates a mood, but it does so in a realistic environment. So I think they walk a very fine line beautifully between things there just for an artistic choice and feeling like a real city that people work and live in.
That kind of green filter that we'd come to see a lot of in the Saw movies and the 2000s, like that. I feel like we're seeing a foreshadowing of that here.
I think in terms of productions design, obviously, John Doe's apartment, we've already talked about that. I mean, probably my favorite location in the movie is Mills and Tracy's apartment, because you could definitely tell you could tell naturally that it's a young couple starting a new chapter in the city. And I think for me, like the moment that always just like touches my heart is when they're having wine and Tracy pours the wine in. Was it like a big like drinking glass instead of a wine glass. And
Brad Pitt does that. And Somerset just looks at it like, did you just give me a 2-liter bottle of wine?
That's right.
So I mean, again, that's without hitting you over the head with the hey, this is a young couple starting off and they don't have a lot right now. I mean, pretty much it tells you everything you need to know.
Our cinematographer is Darius Kanji, and he came from the background. He worked with Jean-Pierre Jeunet on City of Lost Children and Delicatessen. And this was kind of one of his first Hollywood films. And I think he does such a great job. I talked about the green filters. Like, I think he brings a real quality to it of darkness. The light is sucked out of almost every scene until you get to the end where it's so brightly lit.
It is a lost art of being able to make a dark film where you're still able to see everything.
Yeah, agreed.
It's not something these days, if something's dark, it's all dark. Unless you have blackout drapes in your house, you are like, what is happening? But this, we are like, I know where everything is. I'm seeing everything I'm supposed to see, and it's still dark and creepy, and I appreciate that.
One of our MVPs on this one is Rob Bottin, who does our makeup effects. That actor was a big actor, but he was also wearing a lot of prosthetic on top of that. And then there was all the lines and the veins and things like that Rob Bottin was responsible for.
Sloth.
That's because I'm getting to Sloth.
There.
Because Sloth, holy mackerel, like that is an I mean, it was a very thin actor to begin with, but then, Rob Bottin, works his magic. And I was looking at Bottin's filmography on his IMDb page. He hasn't done a movie since 2002. And I'm not quite sure what is going on there. Because he was like the man, it was him, Rick Baker, Stan Winston. He only has been nominated once for an Oscar, which again just blows me away. I'm like, how is that possible? He's an incredible makeup artist, responsible for effects on The Thing, RoboCop, Legend. He does Tim Curry's darkness makeup. So yeah, it's just fun to have him in the mix. And again, I'm like, well, clearly it's a horror film. I mean, Rob Bottin's working on it.
That's all you need to know right there.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's talk about our 7 deadly sins, our 7 murders. What's your quote favorite, or the one that like resonates with you the deepest?
Sloth. I mean, we don't get a lot of time with lust and pride. Sloth is the one that haunts me. I was right along with those SWAT team agents when I did not never occurred to me that was not a corpse. And then the doctor, I mean, there's a little bit of melodrama in the doctor's speech in the hallway, and they're asking, can we question them? And he's like, well, this person's been through the worst thing any human being could possibly, and you're like, okay, I get it. But but the medical analysis, the real, like, this person's brain is mush. They chewed off their tongue long ago. Like, it's just like, it just keeps getting worse. That's the one, because it takes a year.
Sloth for sure is probably my number one, and probably a close second is Lust. Just because even though you don't see much, just Leland Orser's performance.
Yeah.
And when you understand what he had to do,
I was partial towards Lust and Pride. Lust because, as Dino mentioned, Leland Orser's performance just lives rent-free in your head, giving that hyperventilating performance. So I can't get that scene out of my head because of his performance. And Pride, even though it's the briefest crime scene after the murder, it really was a very interesting setup that still holds up today. This idea of self-pride and appearance, it made me think of Instagram and insecurities, where this person was given the choice: you can go undisfigured or you can just put yourself out of your misery. And I even though it was touched upon briefly, I really did enjoy the time that was spent in the writing that went into talking about that murder.
For me, today, and it depends on when I watched the movie, but this time around when I finished it, it was Pride. As Dot is saying, that there is really, well, for me, there's something very creepy about being able to say, what would you do, right? And so I can't say, what would I do if somebody tied me to a bed for a year and had it, right? So this time around, watch it. But it's like, understanding the world in which we understand it, knowing what I know about myself and all that, what is that choice? Like, what do you do? And then the notion that she hated herself. She was so ugly on the inside, right? That like essentially all her value was on the outside. So I think today that resonates with me. And then if you mention Instagram and where we live right now, I tell you, I heard a commercial the other day that started off with two young women saying, if you're anything like us, then you love attention. And I turned it. Right. Like, and it's kind of like, I know I'm in trouble.
I deny
here, right?
you.
Like, I'm in trouble. And so because of where we are now, I think that does resonate. And like I said, all of that, me, whatever insecurities I might have, I can be as vain as the next person. Right. Like, I mean, I just think it's all of that. And again, the psychology of that crime and choice.
Chris?
Well, I have to go on record as saying that Katie and I are now in our second episode of talking about Leland Orser freaking out because we're also on the Alien 3 panel where he was what's it? I'm like, that's so like those two things I'm like, he's like, I fucked her, what's that saying to me? What's this? They like kind of like this Ouroboros that just eats its own tail of Leland Orser. But John Doe did a good job because he did really slap me in the face with all of them, because Leland Orser has that, you're seeing this psychological damage that he's done to another human being, without getting into what Leland Orser's background is, Yeah, I guess sloth, the jump scare, watching John McKinley freak out. I'm like, yeah, geez, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't know too that it was an actor. They thought it was a corpse. They thought it was a prop. He had to hold his breath really a long time too.
Gluttony was the one that it's the one that I think about the most, like how methodical it has to be, how torturous that is. And to target somebody because they are obese, like that's a sin somehow in his mind. And that was something that, the idea that he went out and got food and came back and continued. There's something about the sadism of that just, as Freeman is describing it, and that's the first one out of the gate, and then the fact that he kicks him, like Dad said, and it ruptures him internally. And it's like, he doesn't just let him eat himself to death. He's going to deliver the final blow. Like, that just gives you a really strong indication of who this person is. Something that struck me this time around, and it had never, I've seen this probably 10 times or so. Leland Orser's character did not have to do what he did. He chooses to live. He chooses to kill somebody else. And again, that's kind of John Kramer-ish, putting somebody in a quote impossible situation. But it's amazing how much empathy we have for him, that he was put in that position. The fact that he had a gun in his mouth, it's like, and I had to kill this other person. It's like, no, you had a choice. You had a choice. And that had never struck me before. But this time around, I went, no, you could have just said, you have to kill me. I'm not killing somebody else.
I worry that we're all revealing our secret deadly sin.
What would we do?
The thing that drives us
I'm just
all.
gonna lean over here and lock my door.
Mine was sloth. I'm too lazy to come back here.
But that is an interesting point, because the same thing occurred to me this last time through as well. It's like, oh yeah, he had a gun in my mouth. What was I supposed to do? It's like,
right. Well,
we all like it, but that brings in the other question of like, we all like to think we would be the type of person who would say,
right,
well, then you're just gonna have to kill me, partner. But I don't want to be put in that position to find out.
Right.
But also, gluttony. What was his thing? Was a gun to his head telling him to eat? And like, was there this belief of he's going to get out of this if he eats? Like they say, it's the hope that kills you. Like, it's the idea that like, if I just keep doing what this person asked me to, I'm going to be able to walk out of this situation.
Right.
And then you don't.
And you recognize, I mean, if you take a moment and realize the person you're dealing with, there's no way. You'd be better off to force them to shoot you.
In that moment, though, I asked myself the same thing: what would I do? And I would like to say, if I were in Leland or Horser's shoes, I'd say, no, just put me out of my misery. I'm not doing this. But I don't know. I've never been, and I pray to God I'm never in that situation. Yeah, I think that's one of the brilliant aspects of John Doe as a villain, is that he's so cruel, just cruel in the way that he dangles that carrot in front of maybe not every victim, but in certain victims, giving them that sense of hope. And I think in that moment, I would grab onto that and say, well, maybe I can, if I have another day, I can reason with this person. I can talk him out of, going through with this, when we as the viewing audience know, like, no, you can't reason with this guy. It's not happening.
There's a really great combination, I think, for this film. I think the other reason it resonates is that there's a combination of elevated intellectualism, and then there's the dark exploitation, murder, makeup effects, things like that. Like, it's a really wonderful combination of those two, in that you feel smart while you're watching it because you're being led through these ideas and these concepts. And then you're also being tapped into that darker part where you're like, ooh, what would it be like to be murdered by a razor sharp dildo? What would it be like to be forced to sit there and to eat until you die? It's tapping into different parts of our brain as viewers. And I think that's just like, how did you do that? How did you think that would even work? And yet it does.
I think it's interesting that none of us have brought up greed, which is essentially the same thing. I mean, he made him slice off pieces of himself to balance the scales. That's interesting to me, that we're like, oh,
because he's a friggin' lawyer.
The poor girl who had to choose between her face and her life, and it's like the lawyer did too. It was like a 3-day ordeal. Like whatever.
Yeah,
no, it's just a pound of flesh, man.
You can survive.
Make it
that,
2.
right?
Come on.
Despair.
Where's Portia when you need her?
Right. Before I forget, I was just we were talking about props a moment ago, and I totally forgot until recently that they had actually made a prop of Gwyneth Paltrow's head to be shown at the end, which I think they end up later used for Contagion, when they show her character who's died towards the beginning of the movie in her autopsy, which I was like, part of me was like, oh, it would be kind of cool to go back and actually see it. But I think going back to what we talked about earlier, like, horror being in the mind's eye, like I feel like it's perfect the way it is, and glad that we didn't see that original shot.
We've talked about some of the highlights in terms of the lowlights with all the murders and things like that. Does anybody have any like offbeat moments that resonate for them that they want to shout out?
I already did earlier, me on the phone. It was not even my desk. He improvised that because the phones kept ringing while they were filming.
Like, why are you answering it then?
Yeah.
It's not calling for you.
Yeah.
No, I don't know that it's offbeat as much as it just the scene in the library when Freeman is doing research. First of all, it just speaks to me because it's like doing research that way. There's something about being in libraries and making copies and all the things that I just value that. So there's that, but that they play the classical music kind of also has this intertextual relay with Shawshank Redemption when there's the operatic singer. Yes. And the response. And so I can't disconnect those two things in my mind.
They also know him so well, which I love. Like they know him so well. They know he's retiring. They know he's going to like the music. They know, like they all know each other. It's really creates a community in like 5 seconds,
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's the contrast of this really beautiful music with some of the images that he's looking at. Right. And so it's that collision. Kind of like the day and the day scene and the resolution of the film, right? It's there again in that scene as well. And so all of that, I find it kind of nice. It's kind of soothing.
Yeah.
Good movie
if there's anything soothing about this film.
They're just setting you up so they can kick you in the balls again.
Right.
Along those lines, it is a movie that I don't remember any sort of computer scenes in.
Right.
You know,
well,
like
there's the matching
now,
of the fingerprints. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, but like nowadays, he would, you would see your detective online Googling Dante's Inferno, and pulling all these things rather than going to this library and pulling the stuff off and making those notes. So but yeah, I mean, there is that almost lack of technology in what's going on.
It happens off screen with the FBI guy.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite offbeat moments is it makes me laugh every time or snicker a little bit is when they get to the desert and they get out and they say, "What is that?" "It's a dead dog." He looks at him and says, "I didn't do that."
That's a good one.
Yeah, there's that moment. And also I noticed there's the token scene of Brad Pitt eating where they're just hanging out in the library and Brad Pitt's just eating potato chips. I think he does it in all his movies.
He's so bored.
He always eats. He eats in like every movie.
I think one of my offbeat scenes that I don't know why I find it kind of sad is I think it's towards the beginning of the movie where Brad Pitt's waiting in the rain, or Mills is waiting in the rain for Somerset holding, I think they're open coffee cups, if I remember correctly. There's no cover in them. I remember in the movie theater, I'm like, dude, the rain is getting in your coffee. Like, and of course, Somerset just totally disregards it, and Mills puts it down like on the ground as they walk up to the crime scene. I think for gluttony. But that scene always just sticks out in my mind for some reason.
He gives the other one to the beat cop, who's like, "Thanks."
Oh, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for this brain-filled coffee.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
Garbage.
One of my favorite moments is when they are shaving their chests to put the microphones on. And that exchange, I mean, there's another line that we say around the house all the time, which is, if a UFO comes out of John Doe's head, I want you to have expected it. But there's a really great moment. Mills says, Somerset says, yeah. And then that's it. I think there is something that these are huge things that we want to communicate, and we cannot. They are too big to be shared. And I think that's also something, I mean, this is a very male-centric film. And I think that is something that does speak to that male condition, is being inarticulate. Somerset is hugely articulate. He is educated, but he also recognizes that sometimes there are no words for what we're trying to say. All you can do is hold space with that other human being. I think both of them recognize where we're going. This is not going to be good because John Doe always has the upper hand, yet they don't have a choice. This is the only best thing they can do.
And I agree about it being a male-centric movie. The one thing I'd forgotten was the line where they are sitting they're waiting for the guy to show up so they can get the information. And Brad Pitt, at least on the other side of me, I don't want people to think we're dating.
Right.
And it's just like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, get over yourself.
Right.
I'd forgotten about that line. It's like, oh, really, dude? Like, is this what we're doing? Right?
But then I feel like the good juxtaposition to that is the scene where Mills is napping on Somerset's shoulder. Which I was like, oh, that's so adorable. But
right.
But you see him wake up and he's like, I don't want anybody to see that.
It's not a small moment, but I'm always like, Morgan Freeman never identifies himself as a police officer to that poor delivery guy at the end. There's just a guy standing on the road with a gun being like, get out of the van! What's in the box? And he's just like, and then he's like, I'm sending this guy to you. The guy's just like,
looking away. Make sure you pick him up.
Yeah.
Probably needs a bathroom.
And then he's instantly calm. He's like, I'm sending somebody to you. It's like, yes, I just pulled a gun on him and sent him running.
Let's talk about that final scene, though, because that is the one time, I think, Dina, you pointed it out, that we see Somerset lose his cool. And I
found it wildly well earned because he has information that he knows David doesn't have.
Right.
And now he knows that John Doe has it too. That Tracy was pregnant. Like he knows everything and can see the whole rest of the plan laid out before him, which he has been unable to do right up until that moment that he opens the box. So I found it incredibly well earned. Those words, the way he says them, resonate in my head all the time. California, stay away from here. Yep. John Doe has the upper hand now. Like, it's so powerful because he's so off balance and he's been our rock the whole time.
he is just trying to get John Doe to shut up. I don't think he's lost his cool so much as like, I know if he shares this information that she was pregnant, there is no way John Doe is walking away from this. And he does not, it's not that he wants to save John Doe. He wants to save Mills. He wants to keep Mills from killing this person for Mills's sake. And the only way to do that is to get this guy to shut up. And he fails to do so.
It is uncharacteristic. There are actually two scenes throughout this movie where Somerset was not being his usual self. The first one being one that sort of touched me because he was laughing with them while at dinner. And it's the first time you really see Morgan Freeman smile big and enjoy himself and not spend the night alone throwing a switchblade at a dartboard. But yeah, that in addition to the end where he loses his cool and hits John Doe, it just sticks out to me every time because, like you said, it's just we've lost this sturdy rock in this film. I mean, yeah, John Doe has him by the strings as well.
He was supposed to be immune to that. He was supposed to be above that. He was supposed to be able to figure it out.
If he is like this, it must be bad.
Yep.
Right.
Something that just occurred to me was, what if Mills had gone to get the van?
And yet John Doe knows he's not going to.
Nope.
He says, there he goes. Like, I knew this would happen. He's in control the whole time. So disturbing. This is a movie about control, which is, I think, the scariest thing a movie could be about. And like all zombie movies are ultimately about control. This one is too, of who's in control, who knows who's in control, and how can you wrest control from the crazy person who's trying to kill a bunch of people. And the answer that it gives us is you can't. It's too late. It's already in play. It's already done. Just watch it play out.
I think about the the giant illuminated cross in John Doe's apartment. You know, when they finally get in there, and just in the end, John Doe wins. You know what I mean? And he has to go to his death believing everything he did was right and that he is chosen by God. And I think that's where there he goes comes from. It's that last moment of like, this is a 50-50 coin toss of who goes to get the delivery guy. And it's to John Doe, the right person who does it. So he has this moment of, he knows he's going to die because that's the end of the plan. But now it almost feels like, and there is a God and he loves me. You know, it's this idea that everything I've done is right and just, and now I'm being rewarded for it by being proven right, which is, you know, extremely transgressive. And one of the reasons why I love this film.
I absolutely love this film. I think I used to tell people it's one of the most complete films I've ever seen. And I don't overstate. I still feel that way after having watched it again. And it struck me that, you know, when I talk to my students in my classes, that they're not watching a lot of things, even from, 2000, because they think it's old. I showed Babel in class once, and I didn't know a movie from back then could be that good. And this was 3 years ago, right? It's like, that was 2006. In that way, it's like, I'm really happy. And that we have this movie that holds up really well, but that people aren't watching it. Like we're seeing it, but that there's a generation that's missing this kind of cinema. And so that kind of stood out to me. And it says a couple of things. Of course, it's kind of a commentary about how people are watching, and there are many things to look at. And so there are any number of reasons people aren't watching. If a student wants to know how to hone their craft, go watch Seven, right? If you have the stomach for it, go watch this movie. Make something that is going to be a part of your legacy and stand up decades later. For me, like, that's the true sign of a great film.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts would focus on just how subversive the movie is. I think in my formative years of finding the movies that I loved, particularly during the 90s, they were all pretty subversive. A lot of big indie film movement. And this is one that really impacted me, I think, of many films I saw around that time, not only because of the scene that we talked about at the end, but just so many elements that made it dark and gave it this signature touch. And I think the credits, I'll go back to those again. You have this film that with a climax that gutted me as a teenager seeing this, probably prepared me for loving Requiem for a Dream later on. 'Cause I think that one was worse. But then this movie has the gall at the end to move the credits in the opposite direction, just to say it can. Be like, hey, while you're thinking about this trauma that you experienced, yeah, we just went there. So yeah, just the overall subversiveness of the movie and the messiness of it almost, I just love it. I think that's why I fell in love with it, and it still holds up to this day. I've seen it many times, and I enjoyed revisiting it tonight.
Sometimes there are no happy endings, and I feel like Seven is a stark reminder. It's one of the first films that I remember seeing in my younger years where I walked away saying, where was my nice, tidy, happy ending where the good guys win and the bad guys lose? And even though I don't think I really appreciated it at the time, especially now 30 years later looking back, I'm so glad that Fincher and Brad Pitt and everybody like dug their heels in with New Line Cinema and said, no, we need this original ending. We're not going to go with this cookie cutter homogenized ending that we've seen so many times. And real quickly too, I want to give a shout out to New Line Cinema because I feel like this film was definitely a turning point for that studio, kind of transitioning them from their early Nightmare on Elm Street indie horror days to eventually get them a few years later to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I feel like for me, Seven was a watershed moment for New Line. So, but yeah, definitely glad to have this opportunity to chat about the film with everybody on the 30th anniversary.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we've talked about, for the past 90 minutes, talking about how dark and unpleasant this film is. And yet it went on to become a massive success, on a pretty small budget. Like, I think it was right between 30 and 40 million for the budget. And it continues to resonate, as you said, Novotny. I don't know that people are watching it with the same frequency that our generation did, but it is one that I think people continue to find their way back to as they look back at Fincher's back catalog, Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, etc., that they are going to eventually discover this movie and be surprised by how good it is and how influential it was. I think its shadow casts forward even today. Like, we still see it resonating throughout the films that are coming out. Thank you all so much. What a great conversation about a really great movie, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all too. Appreciate you all.
Yeah, nice to meet all of you.
You too.
Yeah, this was fun.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.